Lightning cracked over the black water, and Elena Whitfield heard something scream. It was not the scream of a person. It was lower, rougher, torn at the edges, but it carried pain that no animal sound should carry. She stood frozen on the wooden bridge above the river, rain hammering her shoulders, her flashlight beam shaking in her hand. The river below her was swollen from 3 days of storm, brown and fast and furious, dragging branches and debris toward the bend, where the water dropped into darkness. Then she saw it, a shape in the water, gray and heavy, fighting the current with legs that no longer had the strength to fight. A wolf, a massive wolf, its belly swollen and round, being pulled toward the rocks. Elena did not think. She dropped her flashlight, kicked off her boots, and jumped. The cold hit her like a wall of stone. The current grabbed her instantly, spinning her, filling her mouth with river water, but she kicked hard toward the gray shape ahead of her. She had grown up near this river. She knew where the rocks hid beneath the surface, knew where the water pulled hardest, and she used that knowledge now, cutting sideways instead of straight, letting the current carry her toward the wolf instead of fighting it. Her fingers closed on wet fur. The wolf twisted, and for one terrifying second, Elena thought it might bite her out of fear and pain, the way wounded animals often did. Instead, the creature went still, as if it understood, as if some part of it recognized that this human in the water was trying to help, not harm. Elena wrapped one arm around the wolf's chest, just below its front legs, and kicked toward the bank with everything she had left. The current fought her the entire way, dragging them both toward the rocks at the bend, and for a moment she thought they would not make it, that the river would win, that her name would be another headline about a foolish young woman who died trying to save an animal. Her knee scraped against something solid. Mud. She had reached the shallows. Elena dragged herself and the wolf onto the muddy bank, her lungs burning, her arms shaking from the cold and the effort. The wolf lay beside her, its sides heaving, its swollen belly rising and falling in short, panicked breaths. Elena had seen enough pregnant animals in her work at the town's small veterinary clinic to recognize what she was looking at. This wolf was close to giving birth, very close. "Hold on," Elena whispered, though she knew the wolf could not understand her. "Just hold on." She looked around at the storm, at the dark trees pressing close on every side, and realized she had no plan beyond this moment. She could not leave an injured, pregnant wolf lying in the mud during a storm. She could not carry it far. Not in this condition, not in this weather. But her cabin was only a quarter-mile up the hill, past the old fence line, and if she could get the wolf that far, she could keep it warm, keep it alive until morning. She examined the animal quickly, with hands that had learned to move fast and gentle at the same time. There was a gash along the wolf's shoulder, deep but not deadly, likely from a rock in the river. The wolf's eyes were half open, dark and glassy, watching Elena with an intelligence that made the hair on her arms rise despite the cold. Wolves were smart. Elena knew that. But this felt different. This felt like being studied. "I'm going to help you," Elena said, keeping her voice low and steady, the same voice she used with frightened animals in the clinic. "I'm not going to hurt you." The wolf's ears flicked toward her voice. It did not growl. It did not try to move away. Elena found an old plank of driftwood half buried in the mud nearby, wide and flat enough to serve as a makeshift sled. She rolled the plank beneath the wolf as gently as she could, ignoring the way her hands trembled from cold and adrenaline, and began to pull. The mud sucked at her bare feet. Rain stung her eyes. Every few steps she had to stop, catch her breath, and pull again. The rope of an old fence line wrapped around her palms as she hauled the wolf up the slope toward the tree line. It took nearly an hour to cover a quarter-mile. By the time Elena reached her cabin, her arms felt like they belonged to someone else, and the wolf had gone quiet, its breathing shallow but steady. She kicked open the door, dragged the plank inside, and collapsed against the frame for a moment, staring at the animal she had just risked her life to save, wondering if she had lost her mind. Elena Whitfield was 26 years old. She worked as a veterinary assistant in the small town of Ashwood Hollow, a place surrounded on 3 sides by dense forest and on the 4th by the river that had nearly taken her life tonight. She lived alone in a cabin that had belonged to her grandfather, a quiet man who had taught her how to read the forest before he taught her how to read books. She was used to caring for injured animals. She was not used to nearly drowning for one. She built up the fire first, feeding it, until the small room filled with warmth, and then she turned her attention to the wolf. She cleaned the gash on its shoulder with supplies from the first aid kit she kept for her own work, murmuring softly the entire time, the way she always did with frightened patients. The wolf watched her hands work, its dark eyes tracking every movement, and something about the way it watched her made Elena's chest tighten with an emotion she could not name. "You're not just any wolf, are you?" she whispered. The wolf did not answer, of course. But its tail, weak and heavy, thumped once against the wooden floor, as if in response. By the time Elena finished dressing the wound, exhaustion had settled deep into her bones. She wrapped a blanket around herself, sat on the floor beside the wolf so she could keep watch through the night, and let her eyes close for just a moment. She woke to the sound of rain still falling, and the gray light of early morning pressing through the windows. The wolf was awake too, its head lifted, watching her with those same intelligent eyes. Elena checked its wound, relieved to see no sign of infection, and refilled a bowl with water, setting it near the animal's mouth. The wolf drank slowly, carefully, never taking its eyes off her. Elena spent the following days caring for the wolf, the way she would care for any patient, though she kept the secret to herself. She knew that if anyone in town learned she was hiding an injured pregnant wolf in her cabin, they would call it dangerous, foolish, illegal. Wolves had not been seen in this part of the forest for years, not since the old packs had been driven out or hunted down decades ago. A wolf appearing now, injured and heavily pregnant, felt like more than coincidence. It felt like a warning. On the third night, the sky finally cleared, and moonlight spilled through the cabin windows in a long silver beam that fell directly across the wolf's resting body. Elena, half asleep in the chair beside the fire, opened her eyes just in time to see something that made her blood run cold. Men were standing at the edge of her property. 3 of them, still and silent among the trees, wearing dark cloaks that seemed to swallow the moonlight instead of reflecting it. They did not move. They did not call out. They simply stood there, watching her cabin, watching the window where the wolf lay sleeping, just a few feet away from Elena's chair. Elena's heart pounded so loudly, she was certain the men could hear it from where they stood. She reached slowly for the old hunting rifle her grandfather had left behind, more for the comfort of holding something solid than out of any real confidence that she could use it. When she looked back toward the window, the men were gone. She did not sleep again that night. In the morning, she found tracks near the tree line, boot prints, deep and deliberate, circling her cabin twice before disappearing into the deeper woods. Whoever those men were, they had been searching for something, and Elena had a terrible feeling she knew exactly what. She looked down at the wolf, now resting more peacefully than it had in days, its wound healing faster than Elena thought should be possible for any ordinary animal. The scars along its side, ones she had not noticed clearly before, looked less like the marks of branches or rocks, and more like something else entirely. Straight lines, deliberate cuts, the kind of marks left by a blade, not by nature. "Who did this to you?" Elena murmured, kneeling beside the sleeping wolf. "And who is looking for you now?" The wolf's ear twitched at the sound of her voice, but it did not wake. Elena sat back on her heels and stared at the fire, her mind turning over questions she had no answers for. She had pulled a dying animal from a river 3 nights ago, expecting nothing more than to nurse it back to health, and eventually watch it return to the wild. Instead, she had stumbled into something far stranger, something that made cloaked strangers stand silently at the edge of her property in the dead of night, something that made scars look like they had been carved on purpose. Whatever this wolf was, it was not simply a wolf, and whatever was hunting it was not simply searching for a lost animal. Elena had spent her whole life in Ashwood Hollow, and in 26 years she had never once felt unsafe in these woods. Now, sitting beside a wounded, pregnant creature with a secret she could not explain, she felt the forest itself had changed around her, as though something ancient and hidden had chosen this moment, and chosen her, to step out of the shadows. She reached down and rested her hand gently on the wolf's side, feeling the steady rise and fall of its breathing, feeling, beneath her palm, the small movements of the pups still waiting to be born. "Whatever is coming," Elena whispered into the quiet cabin, "I am not letting them take you." Outside, the wind shifted through the trees, carrying with it a sound Elena almost mistook for a distant howl. She sat very still, listening, waiting to see if it would come again, It did not. But she knew, with a certainty she could not explain, that the silence would not last much longer. Something was coming to Ashwood Hollow, and it was coming for the wolf sleeping beside her fire. 3 more days passed before the next sign appeared, and this time it came in daylight, which frightened Elena more than the night visitors ever had. She had gone into town for supplies, leaving the wolf resting in the cabin, with the door locked and the windows checked twice. Ashwood Hollow was a small place, the kind where everyone knew everyone else's business, and Elena moved through the market with her head down, buying extra meat and bandages under the excuse of a demanding week at the clinic. She was paying for a bag of ice when she heard 2 older men talking near the hardware store, their voices low, but not low enough. "My cousin swears he saw wolf tracks out past the old mill," one man said. "Big ones. Bigger than any wolf I've ever heard of in these parts." "Wolves haven't been seen round here in 20 years, the other replied. "Something's stirring things up. My dog wouldn't stop barking at the tree line all night. Acted like something was watching the house." Elena kept her eyes on the ice, her pulse quickening. She paid quickly and left, walking fast toward her truck, resisting the urge to look over her shoulder. When she reached the vehicle, she found a single black feather resting on the hood, placed there with obvious care, as though someone wanted her to know they had been close enough to touch her truck without being seen. She drove home faster than she should have, checking her mirrors the entire way, and did not relax until she was back inside the cabin, with the door bolted behind her. The wolf lifted its head when she entered, and for a moment, Elena swore its eyes looked almost worried, tracking her the way a person might track someone they cared about who had come home late. Elena knelt beside it and pressed her forehead gently against its fur, breathing out slowly. "They're getting closer," she whispered. "I don't know who they are, but they're getting closer." That night, the wolf's condition changed. Its breathing grew heavier, its body restless, shifting position again and again, as though searching for comfort it could not find. Elena recognized the signs immediately from her years working with pregnant animals at the clinic. Labor was beginning. She spent hours beside the wolf, offering water, keeping the fire warm, speaking softly the way she always did during difficult births, though nothing about this felt like any birth she had witnessed before. The wolf's body trembled with each wave of pain, and twice Elena thought she heard something almost like a human moan escape the animal's throat, low and strangled, quickly swallowed back into a growl. Just past midnight, as rain began to tap gently against the windows again, the wolf let out a sound unlike anything Elena had ever heard. It was not quite a howl, and not quite a scream. It was something in between, raw and desperate, and as the sound faded, the wolf's body began to change. Elena stumbled back against the wall, pressing a hand over her mouth to keep from crying out. The fur was receding. The shape was shifting, bones cracking and reforming beneath skin that stretched and smoothed into something entirely different. Within minutes, where the wolf had lain, there was now a woman. She looked young, perhaps not much older than Elena herself, with dark hair, damp against her pale skin, and a body still heavily pregnant, still trembling from the pain of labor that had not yet finished. Her eyes, when they opened, were the exact same shade of gold Elena had stared into for the past several days. "Please," the woman gasped, her voice hoarse and human now instead of animal. "Please help me. My pups. They're coming." Elena's training took over before her shock could stop her. She grabbed clean towels, boiled water on the stove, and knelt beside the stranger, doing everything she had ever learned about assisting a difficult birth, adjusting instinctively for the fact that her patient was no longer, strictly speaking, an animal, and yet was not entirely human either. The woman gripped Elena's hand so hard it bruised, crying out twice more, and within the hour, 2 small, healthy infants lay wrapped in towels beside the exhausted mother, their skin pink and warm, their small chests rising and falling steadily. Elena stared at the newborns, then at the woman, unable to fully process what she had just witnessed. "Thank you," the woman whispered, tears slipping down her face as she pulled her children close. "You saved us. All 3 of us." "Who are you?" Elena finally managed to ask, her voice shaking. "What are you?" The woman closed her eyes, exhaustion pulling at every word. "My name is Mira," she said, "and I am the mate of the Wolf King of the Northern Territory. I fled here because men from a rival pack tried to kill me, and my unborn pups before we could challenge their claim to power. I did not think I would survive the river. I did not think anyone would find me in time. Elena sat back on her heels, her mind spinning through everything she had witnessed over the past several days. The strange scars, the cloaked men in the trees, the feather on her truck. None of it had been coincidence. All of it had been circling closer to this single truth. The men in the woods, Elena said slowly. They're looking for you. Mira's face went pale despite her exhaustion. Then they know I am close. We are not safe here. None of us. Elena looked down at the two sleeping infants, so small and fragile, then at Mira, whose eyes held both gratitude and terror in equal measure. Whatever fear Elena felt for herself was outweighed by something stronger, a fierce protectiveness she had not expected to feel so quickly for people she had known only days. You saved yourself by surviving that river, Elena said firmly. I'm not going to let anyone take you now. Not you, and not your children. Mira reached out and gripped Elena's hand again, this time gently. You do not understand what you are agreeing to. My mate will come searching for me. When wolves of his kind find their family, they do not arrive quietly, and the ones hunting me will not stop simply because I have given birth. If anything, they will move faster now, before my children grow strong enough to be protected by pack law. Elena swallowed hard, glancing toward the dark window, remembering the silent shapes that had once stood at the edge of her land. Then we need a plan. Tonight. Outside, thunder rolled low across the hills, and somewhere far in the distance, carried on the wind, came the sound of a long, powerful howl, deeper and stronger than any Elena had heard before. Mira's head snapped toward the window, her exhausted eyes suddenly sharp with recognition. That is not one of them, she whispered, her voice trembling with something that sounded almost like hope. That is Kale. Who is Kale? Elena asked. Mira looked at her, and for the first time since transforming, a small, fragile smile crossed her tired face. My mate, she said. The king has found us. The howl came again, closer this time, and Elena felt the sound in her chest before she heard it in her ears. It was not like any animal call she had ever known. It carried weight, purpose, something almost like a voice, trying to speak actual words through the shape of a howl. Mira struggled to sit up, clutching her newborns tighter against her chest, her eyes fixed on the door. He will know this cabin, Mira said. He will know my scent is here. Elena, you must open the door before he tears it down. He will not mean harm, but fear makes even the calmest king dangerous. Elena's hands trembled as she crossed the small room and unbolted the door, stepping back quickly as rain swept inside on a gust of wind. For a long moment, nothing happened. The night outside was dark and empty, the trees swaying under the storm, and Elena began to wonder if she had imagined the howl entirely. Then a shape moved at the tree line. It was larger than any wolf Elena had ever seen in pictures or films, larger even than the wolf she had pulled from the river days ago. Its fur was black as the storm clouds above, its eyes a piercing shade of ice blue that seemed to glow faintly in the darkness. It moved with a kind of controlled power, muscles shifting beneath its coat with every step, and when it reached the edge of the cabin's light, it stopped and looked directly at Elena, as if measuring whether she was friend or threat. Kale, Mira called weakly from behind Elena. It's me. I'm here. Our children are here. The great wolf's head turned toward the sound of her voice, and something in its posture changed instantly, the tension in its shoulders melting into something closer to desperation. It moved past Elena without acknowledging her, crossing the room in 2 long strides before its body began to shift, the same cracking and reshaping Elena had witnessed with Mira hours earlier, until where the wolf had stood, a man now knelt beside the bed. He was tall, built with the kind of strength that came from a lifetime of physical power, rather than gyms or vanity, his dark hair damp from the rain, his ice-blue eyes locked on Mira and the 2 infants in her arms, with an intensity that made the air in the room feel heavier. He gathered Mira and the children into his arms carefully, as though they were made of glass, pressing his forehead against hers, murmuring words too quiet for Elena to hear. For a long moment, Elena stood frozen near the door, feeling like an intruder in a moment that belonged entirely to this reunited family. She began to step back outside to give them privacy, when the man's head turned sharply toward her, his eyes sharp and assessing in a way that made her stomach tighten. "You," he said, his voice deep and rough, carrying an authority that Elena felt in her bones, even though he had not raised it. "You are the one who pulled her from the river." It was not quite a question. Elena nodded anyway. "Her name is Mira. She told me who you are." The man rose to his feet slowly, still holding Mira and the infants close, and studied Elena with an expression she could not fully read, something between disbelief and deep, quiet gratitude. "My name is Kale," he said. "I am the Alpha King of the Northern Pax. Mira is my mate, and these children are my heirs. You saved all 3 lives that matter most to me in this world, and you did it as a human, alone, with no reason to risk yourself for creatures you did not understand." "I couldn't leave her in that river," Elena said simply. "Anyone would have done the same." Something flickered across Kale's face, an emotion Elena couldn't quite place, somewhere between disbelief and quiet respect. "Very few would have done the same," he said. "Fewer still would have hidden a wounded, pregnant wolf in their home for days, protected her from men who came searching in the night, and then delivered my children with her own hands when the moment came. You are not an ordinary human, Elena Whitfield." Elena blinked, startled that he knew her name. "How did you know?" "I have known everything that has happened near this cabin for the past 3 days," Kale said grimly. "My trackers have been watching from a distance, keeping the enemy scouts from finding this place, while I gathered enough strength to come myself. The men who searched your property were not mine. They belonged to Draven, the Alpha who tried to kill Mira and our children before they were even born." Elena's chest tightened. "Then they know she's here." "They suspect," Kale corrected, "which is worse. Suspicion makes desperate men reckless." He looked down at Mira and the infants, his jaw tightening with a protectiveness so fierce it seemed to radiate off him like heat. "We cannot stay in this cabin. Draven's scouts will return, and next time they will not simply watch from the trees." Mira, exhausted but alert, looked up at him. "Elena helped us survive, Kale. We cannot simply leave her here unprotected. If Draven's men learn what she did for us, they will see her as a threat too." Kale's eyes moved back to Elena, and for a long moment he studied her in silence, something calculating and careful behind his gaze, as though weighing an enormous decision. Elena felt oddly exposed under that stare, as if he could see straight through every wall she had ever built around herself. "She is right," Kale said finally. "Elena Whitfield, you have placed yourself inside a conflict far larger than this small cabin, whether you intended to or not. Draven's people were watching this place. They will have reported what they saw, or at least what they suspected. Your safety can no longer be guaranteed by these walls alone." Elena's heart pounded. "What are you saying?" "I am saying that I owe you a debt greater than gold or gratitude can repay," Kale said. "And I am saying that leaving you here, alone, unprotected, would be a betrayal of that debt. Come with us, to the Northern Territory, where my protection is absolute, and Draven's reach ends at the mountains. You will be safe there, safer than you could ever be here, now that his men know your face." Elena looked between Kale's steady, commanding presence and Mira's pleading eyes, and then down at the 2 sleeping infants she had helped bring into the world only hours ago. Everything about this decision terrified her, the strangeness of it, the danger, the impossible scale of a world she had not known existed until 3 nights ago. But beneath the fear was something else, a thread of certainty she could not quite explain, a sense that she had already stepped too far into this story to simply turn back and pretend the river had never happened. "I don't even know what your kingdom looks like," Elena said quietly. "I don't know your laws, your people, anything about your world." "Then let me show you," Kale said, and for the first time, something almost gentle softened the hard lines of his face, slowly, carefully. "I will not force you into danger you do not understand, Elena, but I am asking you to trust that the world you are about to see is one where courage like yours is not just noticed, it is honored." Thunder rumbled outside, softer now, the storm beginning to pass. Elena looked once more at Mira and her children, safe now in Kale's arms because Elena had refused to walk away from a dying stranger in a flooding river days ago. She thought of the cloaked men at the tree line, of the feather on her truck, of a world that had already found her whether she wanted it to or not. "All right," Elena said finally, her voice steadier than she expected. I'll come. Kale's shoulders eased slightly, relief passing briefly across his features before the mask of a king settled back into place. Then gather what you need tonight, he said. We leave before dawn. It will be safer to travel while Draven's scouts still believe Mira is hiding somewhere near this cabin. As Elena moved through her small home, gathering the few belongings she could not bear to leave behind, she felt the shape of her old life, folding quietly closed behind her, like a door shutting on a room she would likely never enter again. Outside, the storm was finally breaking apart, and the first pale light of dawn began to creep over the treetops, illuminating a path that led somewhere Elena had never imagined she would go. Behind her, Kale watched her move through the cabin, with quiet, careful eyes, already beginning, though he did not yet fully understand it himself, to see her as something far more important than a debt he needed to repay. They left the cabin an hour before sunrise, moving quickly and quietly through the wet forest, Kale leading the way with Mira, and the infants carried safely against his chest, in a sling made from blankets. Elena followed close behind, her small bag of belongings slung over one shoulder, her eyes darting nervously toward every shadow between the trees. 2 more wolves joined them at the edge of the property, both large and alert, flanking the group like silent guardians as they moved deeper into unfamiliar territory. Those are my trackers, Kale explained quietly, noticing Elena's tension. Fenwick and Bram. They have been watching this area for 3 days, keeping Draven's scouts from getting too close. You are safe with them. Elena nodded, though safety felt like a strange word to use in a world she barely understood. They walked for hours, the forest growing thicker and wilder the farther they traveled, until the trees themselves seemed older, taller, more ancient than anything Elena had seen near Ashwood Hollow. She began to notice small signs that this was no longer ordinary wilderness. Stone markers carved with symbols she didn't recognize. Strange quiet clearings where the birds did not sing. A heaviness in the air that felt almost magical. We are close to the boundary now, Kale said eventually, glancing back at her. Once we cross it, you will be under the full protection of the Northern Pack laws. No one may harm you within these borders, without answering directly to me. Elena managed a tired smile. That's reassuring, I think. Kale's mouth twitched, something almost like humor flickering behind his usually serious expression. It is meant to be. They crossed the boundary, just as the sun rose fully over the horizon, and Elena felt an odd tingling sensation pass through her body, like static crossing her skin. Kale noticed her reaction immediately. The boundary recognizes you now, he explained. It will allow you to pass freely as a guest under my protection. Few humans have ever been granted such a thing. Elena said nothing, still trying to process what her life had become in the span of a single week. As they continued deeper into the territory, she caught her first glimpse of the Wolf Kingdom, and the sight stole the breath from her lungs. Nestled among towering mountains was a hidden valley, unlike anything Elena had ever imagined. Stone buildings blended seamlessly into cliffsides, their architecture ancient and beautiful, carved directly into rock formations that had clearly stood for centuries. Waterfalls cascaded down distant peaks into crystal-clear pools, and everywhere Elena looked, she saw figures moving through the streets and paths below, some in human form, some in wolf form, moving with the same easy confidence as any ordinary town, except every single one of them carried an unmistakable aura of strength and quiet danger. Elena struggled to find words. This is incredible. This is Highmoor, Kale said, a note of pride entering his voice. The heart of the Northern Pack, and my home for over 200 years. Elena's head snapped toward him. 200 years? Wolves of royal blood age much slower than ordinary humans, Kale explained, amusement flickering across his face at her shock. I am considerably older than I appear, though I assure you, my mind has not aged nearly as much as the years might suggest. Mira, still resting weakly against Kale's chest, let out a soft, tired laugh. Do not let him fool you, Elena. He acts far older than he claims, especially when it comes to matters of duty and honor. Kale shot her an affectionate glance before returning his attention to the path ahead. As they descended into the valley, word of their arrival seemed to spread instantly. Wolves and their human forms alike gathered along the streets, murmuring excitedly at the sight of their king returning with his mate and, most importantly, 2 healthy newborn heirs. Elena felt every eye eventually shift toward her, curious and calculating, clearly trying to determine why a human woman walked among them, carrying nothing more than a small travel bag and an expression of overwhelmed determination. They were brought to the largest structure in the valley, a grand hall carved from pale stone, its entrance flanked by massive stone wolves standing guard on either side. Inside, the ceiling stretched high overhead, and firelight danced across walls decorated with tapestries, depicting battles, hunts, and coronations, spanning generations of pack history. A group of advisors greeted them at the entrance, their expressions ranging from relief to deep suspicion as their eyes landed on Elena. An older woman with silver hair and sharp gray eyes stepped forward first, bowing respectfully to Kale, before turning a scrutinizing gaze on Elena. "My king," the woman said carefully, "we are overjoyed at the safe return of Mira and the heirs, but might I ask why a human has been brought within our borders?" "This human saved the lives of my mate and my children," Kale said firmly, his tone leaving no room for argument. "She is to be treated as an honored guest under my direct protection. Any harm that comes to her will be treated the same as harm brought against my own family." The advisor's eyebrows rose slightly at the weight of his words, but she bowed again, more deeply this time. "As you wish, my king." Elena felt the weight of dozens of curious, suspicious eyes settling on her as Kale led them further into the hall, and though she kept her chin lifted and her expression calm, her stomach churned with uncertainty. She had left behind everything familiar, her home, her job, the quiet, predictable rhythm of her old life, to walk into a world of ancient wolves, hidden kingdoms, and political dangers she barely understood. Later that evening, after Mira and the infants had been settled into comfortable quarters and finally allowed to rest, Kale found Elena standing alone on a balcony overlooking the valley, watching the sun sink behind the mountains in streaks of orange and purple. "You have been quiet since we arrived," he observed, coming to stand beside her. "It's a lot to take in," Elena admitted. "A week ago, I thought wolves like this only existed in stories." Kale was quiet for a moment, studying the same sunset she watched. "I imagine it is difficult, being pulled so suddenly into a world you never asked to be part of." "I chose to help Mira," Elena said. "I don't regret that. I don't know what my place is here. Your advisors clearly don't trust me. I don't blame them. I'm not one of you." "No," Kale agreed quietly. "You are not, but that does not mean you do not belong." Elena glanced at him, surprised by the certainty in his voice. "You risked your life for a stranger without hesitation," Kale continued. "You protected my family when you had every reason to turn away and call it none of your concern. In our world, courage like that is not measured by blood or species, it is measured by action, and you have proven yours beyond question." Elena felt warmth spread through her chest at his words, though she wasn't entirely sure what to do with the feeling. "Thank you," she said quietly. "That means more than you probably realize." Kale turned to face her fully, his ice blue eyes catching the last light of the setting sun. "I meant every word, Elena, and I intend to make sure my people understand exactly how much you are owed, and exactly how much respect you deserve within these walls." For a long moment, neither of them spoke, the silence between them comfortable despite the uncertainty of everything else around them. Elena studied the powerful, composed man beside her, a king who ruled over an entire hidden kingdom, and found herself wondering, with a flicker of nervous curiosity, exactly what her place in his world might eventually become. Below them, the valley settled into evening quiet, unaware that the choices made in the coming days would determine far more than the fate of one grateful human woman. Somewhere beyond the mountains, Draven and his forces were already regrouping, furious that their prey had slipped beyond their reach, and already planning how to strike again. Elena woke the next morning to sunlight streaming through unfamiliar windows and, for a brief, disoriented moment, forgot entirely where she was. The room around her was carved from the same pale stone as the rest of the grand hall, softened by thick woven rugs and warm furs, and through the window, she could see the mountains rising sharply against a clear blue sky. It took a full minute of staring at the ceiling before the memories of the past days rushed back to her, all at once. The river, the transformation, the howl in the storm, the journey through the forest into a kingdom she still could barely believe existed. A soft knock sounded at her door before it opened just enough for a young woman to peek inside, her expression friendly and a little nervous. "Good morning," the young woman said. "My name is Talia. King Kale asked me to see that you had everything you needed." Elena sat up, running a hand through her tangled hair. "That's very kind, thank you." Talia entered fully, carrying a tray with warm bread, fruit, and tea, setting it carefully on the small table near the window. She was human in appearance but moved with the same quiet grace Elena had noticed in many of the wolves the previous evening, and Elena wondered idly whether Talia was packed by blood or simply someone who had earned her place among them. "Everyone in the valley is talking about you," Talia admitted as she straightened the room, glancing at Elena with open curiosity. "The human who pulled the queen from the river. Some people think it's the bravest thing they've ever heard. Others aren't sure what to think of a human being, given the king's personal protection. I imagine that second group is a lot larger than the first," Elena said dryly. Talia offered a small, sympathetic smile. "Give it time. Actions speak louder than blood here, even if some of the older families forget that sometimes." After Talia left, Elena ate slowly, trying to steady her nerves before facing whatever the day held. She had barely finished when another knock came, this one firmer, and she opened the door to find Kale standing in the hallway, dressed now in simpler clothing than the formal attire of the previous evening, looking somehow both more relaxed and more commanding at once. "I thought you might want to see more of Highmore," Kale said. "If you are willing." Elena hesitated only a moment before nodding. "I'd like that." They walked together through the valley as the morning sun warmed the stone pathways, and Kale pointed out different areas as they passed. The training grounds where young wolves learned to fight and hunt, the healing halls where injured pack members were treated, the great library carved deep into the mountainside, where centuries of pack history had been recorded and preserved. Elena listened intently, asking questions whenever curiosity overcame her nervousness, and Kale answered each one patiently, clearly pleased by her interest. "You said Draven tried to kill Mira and the pups to stop a succession claim," Elena said eventually, as they paused near a quiet fountain at the center of the valley. "What did that mean exactly?" Kale's expression grew more serious. "Draven leads a rival pack to the east. For generations, our territories have maintained an uneasy peace. But Draven has always believed his bloodline should hold power over the northern lands as well as his own. When Mira became pregnant with our heirs, it solidified my claim to rule for at least another generation. Draven saw the birth of our children as a threat to any future ambitions he held toward expanding his territory. So he tried to kill an innocent pregnant woman and her unborn children just to protect his own political ambitions," Elena said, disgust clear in her voice. "Yes," Kale said grimly, "and he will likely try again, now that he knows they survived." Elena felt a chill despite the warm sun. "Is Mira safe here? Are the babies safe?" "Within these walls, yes," Kale said. "Highmore's defenses are strong, and my people are fiercely loyal, but Draven is patient and cunning. He will not attack directly, not yet. He will look for weaknesses first, cracks in our defenses, doubts among my advisors, any opportunity to strike without triggering open war." Elena thought of the suspicious looks from Kale's advisors the previous evening, the sharp-eyed, silver-haired woman who had questioned her presence so carefully, and wondered, with a flicker of unease, whether some of those cracks might already exist closer to the throne than anyone realized. They continued walking, eventually reaching a quiet garden tucked behind the grand hall, filled with flowers Elena didn't recognize, their petals shimmering faintly, even in ordinary daylight. "This was my mother's garden," Kale said, his voice softening as he looked around the peaceful space. "She passed many years ago, but I have kept it exactly as she left it. It's beautiful," Elena said softly, reaching out to gently touch one of the shimmering petals. "I'm sorry for your loss." Kale watched her for a long moment, something unreadable passing behind his eyes. "You have a gentle heart, Elena Whitfield. I have met very few humans, and even fewer wolves, who carry themselves with such genuine kindness, especially toward strangers and their pain." Elena felt heat rise in her cheeks under the weight of his gaze. "I just try to treat people the way I'd want to be treated. It's not really anything special." "It is rarer than you think," Kale said quietly. They stood together in comfortable silence for a while longer, the garden's strange, shimmering flowers swaying gently in the breeze around them. Elena found herself sneaking glances at Cale when she thought he wasn't looking, studying the strong lines of his face, the quiet intensity that seemed to radiate from him even in moments of stillness, and wondered when exactly her fear of this strange new world had begun quietly transforming into something far more complicated. Their peaceful moment was interrupted by the sound of hurried footsteps, and Talia appeared at the garden entrance, her expression tight with worry. "My king," she said quickly, "Fenwick has returned from the eastern border. He says Draven's forces have been spotted moving closer to our territory lines. He requests your presence immediately." Cale's relaxed posture vanished instantly, replaced by the sharp, alert bearing of a king preparing for conflict. "Take Elena back to the Grand Hall," he instructed Talia. "Keep her safe until I return." "Cale," Elena said, catching his arm before he could leave. "Please be careful." He paused, looking down at her hand on his arm, then up at her face, something warm flickering briefly behind the sudden hardness in his eyes. "I will return," he said firmly. "I promise you that." Elena watched him stride away toward the eastern gates, his powerful frame quickly surrounded by several of his most trusted warriors, and felt her heart clench with a worry she hadn't expected to feel so intensely for a man she had known only a matter of days. As Talia gently guided her back toward the Grand Hall, Elena glanced back one final time toward the mountains, praying silently that whatever conflict was brewing beyond those peaks would not bring the war Cale feared crashing down upon them all. The Grand Hall felt unbearably quiet without Cale's presence, and Elena spent the following hours pacing the length of her chambers, unable to focus on anything but the memory of him striding toward the eastern border with warriors flanking his sides. Talia tried to distract her with stories about Highmoor, its history, its people, but Elena's mind kept drifting back to Draven's forces moving closer to the territory line. Near sunset, a commotion rose from the courtyard below, and Elena rushed to the window in time to see Cale returning, tired but unharmed, his expression grim but his posture confident. Relief flooded through her so intensely that she had to grip the windowsill to steady herself. She found him a short while later in the great hall, speaking quietly with his advisors, around a large stone table covered in maps marked with symbols Elena didn't recognize. He looked up as she entered, and something in his tense expression eased slightly at the sight of her. "What happened?" Elena asked, once the advisors had filed out, leaving them alone. "Draven's forces retreated once they realized we were watching the border closely," Cale explained, rubbing a hand across his tired eyes. "It was likely only a test, an attempt to gauge our readiness and response time. He is testing our defenses before deciding how and when to strike more seriously." "That's terrifying," Elena said honestly. "It is troubling," Cale agreed, "but not unexpected. Draven has always preferred patience and strategy over reckless aggression. It makes him more dangerous, in some ways, than an enemy who acts purely on impulse." Elena moved closer, studying the exhaustion etched into his features. "You should rest. You've been dealing with threats and danger for days, without a real break." Cale's mouth curved into a small, tired smile. "Are you concerned for my well-being, Elena Whitfield?" "Someone has to be," Elena said, a teasing note creeping into her voice despite the tension of the day. "You seem determined to run yourself into the ground, protecting everyone else." "It is the duty of a king," Cale said simply, though his eyes softened as he looked at her. "Even kings need someone looking out for them," Elena said quietly. For a long moment, Cale simply looked at her, something shifting behind his ice-blue eyes that made Elena's breath catch in her throat. The space between them felt suddenly charged, filled with unspoken things neither of them seemed ready to name aloud. "Elena," Cale said softly, "in all my years ruling this kingdom, very few people have ever looked at me the way you do, without fear of my power, without expectation of gain, simply with concern for my well-being as a person, rather than as a king." Elena felt her heart pound loudly in her chest. "Maybe that's because, to me, you're not just a king. You're someone who nearly broke down with relief when he found his mate and children safe. Someone who kept a promise to return to me today, even during a dangerous situation. That matters more to me than any title." Cale reached out slowly, giving her every opportunity to step back if she wished, and gently brushed a strand of hair away from her face, his fingers lingering softly against her cheek. You continue to surprise me, in the best possible ways, he murmured. Elena leaned slightly into his touch, her earlier fear of this strange new world fading into something warmer, steadier, as she looked up into his eyes. I didn't expect any of this, she admitted quietly. The wolves, the kingdom, you, none of it. Nor did I, Cale said, his voice rough with quiet honesty. I did not expect, after pulling my mate from danger, to find myself equally captivated by the courage of the woman who saved her. The moment stretched between them, fragile and full of possibility, until the sound of approaching footsteps in the hallway outside broke the spell. Cale stepped back reluctantly, composing himself into the calm, controlled king his people expected to see, though the warmth in his eyes remained as he glanced once more at Elena. Rest well tonight, he said softly. Tomorrow, I would like to introduce you more formally to my council. It is time they understood exactly how much you mean to this kingdom, and to me. Elena nodded, her cheeks warm, her heart still racing from the closeness they had just shared. As she returned to her chambers that night, she found herself smiling softly into the darkness, marveling at how quickly her fear of this strange, dangerous new world had transformed into something that felt remarkably unexpectedly like hope. Yet even as she drifted toward sleep, a small, uneasy thought lingered at the edge of her mind, the memory of the silver-haired advisor's sharp, suspicious gaze, and the unsettling awareness that not everyone in Highmoor would welcome a human standing so close to their king's heart. The council chamber was unlike any room Elena had entered so far in Highmoor. Carved directly into the mountain, its walls lined with ancient tapestries depicting the founding of the Northern Pack, the space felt heavy with centuries of tradition and authority. A long stone table dominated the room, surrounded by advisors whose expressions ranged from cautious curiosity to open suspicion as Elena entered beside Cale the following morning. The silver-haired woman Elena remembered from their first arrival sat near the head of the table, her sharp gray eyes tracking Elena's every movement. Cale had introduced her the previous evening as Councilwoman Odessa, one of his most trusted and most demanding advisors. "My king," Odessa began once everyone had settled, "we understand the debt you feel toward this human for the rescue of the queen and the heirs. But bringing her formally before this council raises questions the pack deserves answered." "Ask your questions," Cale said evenly, though Elena could sense the protective tension radiating from him beside her. Odessa's gaze shifted fully to Elena. "Do you understand, human, the danger you have placed yourself in by remaining within these walls? Draven's forces will not distinguish between wolf and human if war comes. You could easily become a target simply for standing close to our king." "I understand the risk," Elena said, keeping her voice steady, despite her nerves. "I chose to help Mira because it was the right thing to do. I'm not asking for anything in return. If staying here puts me in danger, that's a risk I'm willing to accept, the same way I accepted it pulling her out of that river." A murmur passed through the gathered advisors, some clearly surprised by the calm conviction in Elena's voice. Odessa's expression remained skeptical, but something in her sharp eyes softened slightly. "Bravery is admirable," Odessa said carefully, "but it does not erase the practical dangers of a human living openly within a wolf kingdom during a time of rising conflict. What happens if Draven learns of your presence and decides you represent a valuable target, a way to wound our king without directly attacking pack members?" Elena hesitated, the question striking closer to her own private fears than she wanted to admit. Before she could answer, Cale spoke firmly beside her. "Then my protection over her will be absolute," Cale said, his voice carrying easily through the chamber. "Elena Whitfield saved the lives of my mate and my children, with no expectation of reward, at great personal risk to herself. I owe her a debt that cannot be repaid by wealth or words alone. She remains under my direct protection, and any threat against her will be treated with the same severity as a threat against the royal family itself." Silence fell across the chamber at the weight of his declaration. Odessa studied Cale carefully, something calculating behind her gaze, before finally nodding slowly. "Very well, my king. If that is your decision, the council will honor it." She turned back to Elena, her expression still guarded, but noticeably less hostile than before. "I hope, for all our sakes, that your courage proves as valuable to this kingdom, in the difficult days ahead, as it was on the night you pulled our queen from that river." The meeting continued for another hour, discussing border defenses and Draven's recent movements. And though Elena understood only fragments of the political complexities being discussed, she paid close attention, determined to learn as much as she could about the world she now found herself part of. Later that afternoon, as she walked alone through the gardens trying to process the morning's tense council meeting, Elena noticed a young man watching her from a distance near the training grounds. He was tall and lean, with dark hair and calculating eyes that followed her a moment too long before he turned away. Something about his gaze left Elena feeling unsettled, though she couldn't immediately explain why. She mentioned the encounter to Talia later that evening, describing the young man's appearance as best she could. "That sounds like Corwin," Talia said, frowning slightly as she considered the description. "He's one of Odessa's nephews. Ambitious, from what people say, always looking for ways to prove his usefulness to the council. He was watching me pretty closely," Elena admitted. "Probably just curious," Talia said, though her tone carried a note of uncertainty. "You're the most interesting thing to happen in Highmore in years, Elena. People are bound to stare." Elena nodded, trying to shake off her unease, though the memory of Corwin's calculating gaze lingered uncomfortably at the back of her mind for the rest of the evening. She had already learned, in her short time among the wolves, that not every danger in this kingdom would announce itself with claws and howls in the darkness. Some dangers, she suspected, would be far quieter and far harder to see coming. Over the following 2 weeks, Elena settled into a strange but increasingly comfortable rhythm within Highmore. She spent her mornings helping in the healing halls, where her experience as a veterinary assistant proved surprisingly useful in treating minor injuries among the pack, and her afternoons often walking the valley with Kale, learning more about the history and customs of his people. Mira, recovering well from childbirth, grew into a close friend, the two women spending long hours together as Mira nursed her twins, sharing stories about their very different lives. "You have made quite an impression here," Mira told her one afternoon, watching as Elena gently rocked one of the sleeping infants, a small girl the pack had named Wren. "Even some of the more skeptical council members have started speaking well of you. Not Odessa, though," Elena said with a small smile. "Odessa is cautious with everyone, wolf or human," Mira said. "It is her nature, and honestly, it has protected this pack more than once. Give her time. She will come around, especially once she sees how much you truly care for this kingdom's well-being." Elena appreciated Mira's reassurance, though the memory of Corwin's calculating stare continued to bother her more than she wanted to admit. She had seen him several more times since their first encounter, always watching from a distance, always turning away the moment she noticed him. She hadn't mentioned it to Kale, not wanting to seem paranoid over what might simply be idle curiosity, but the unease refused to fully disappear. It was during a quiet evening walk through the gardens that Elena finally worked up the courage to raise the subject with Kale directly. "Do you trust everyone on your council completely?" she asked carefully, watching his expression for any sign of reaction. Kale glanced at her, surprised by the sudden question. "I trust my closest advisors with my life, and with the lives of my family," he said. "Why do you ask?" Elena hesitated, then explained her encounters with Corwin, the way he watched her, the strange discomfort she couldn't quite shake despite Talia's reassurances. Kale's expression grew thoughtful, then noticeably more serious, as she finished speaking. "Corwin has always been ambitious," Kale said slowly. "Odessa has raised him since his parents died many years ago, and she has high hopes for his future within the pack hierarchy. I have never had reason to doubt his loyalty, but I will have Fenwick keep a closer watch on him, simply as a precaution. I don't want to cause trouble over something that might be nothing," Elena said quickly. "You are not causing trouble," Kale said firmly. "You are trusting your instincts, and in my experience, human instincts are often sharper than we wolves give credit for. I would rather investigate an unfounded concern than ignore a genuine warning." Elena felt relief at his understanding, grateful that he took her worries seriously, rather than dismissing them. They continued walking in comfortable silence for a while, the shimmering flowers of his mother's garden swaying gently around them in the evening breeze. "Can I ask you something else?" Elena said eventually. "Of course." "What happens now, to me, I mean? Long term. I can't stay in this cabin in the woods forever, pretending my old life is waiting for me back in Ashwood Hollow. But I also don't fully understand what my place is here, in your world." Kale stopped walking, turning to face her fully. his expression thoughtful and unusually vulnerable. I have been asking myself the same question, Elena, more often than I probably should. And what answer have you found? Elena asked softly. That I do not want you to leave, Cale admitted, his voice low and honest. That somewhere between the night I found you protecting my family, and this very moment, standing here with you in my mother's garden, my feelings toward you have grown into something far deeper than simple gratitude. Elena's heart pounded loudly in her chest, warmth spreading through her at his words. Cale. I know this is complicated, Cale continued quickly, as though needing to explain himself before losing his courage. I know you have a life beyond these mountains, a career, a home, people who care about you. I would never ask you to abandon everything, simply because of feelings I have developed. But I needed you to know the truth of how I feel, regardless of what you decide to do with that knowledge. Elena stepped closer, reaching up to gently rest her hand against his chest, feeling the steady, powerful beat of his heart beneath her palm. My old life feels very far away right now, she admitted softly. And honestly, Cale, I think my feelings have been growing right alongside yours, even if I was too nervous to admit it out loud. Cale's eyes widened slightly with surprised hope, his hand coming up to gently cover hers against his chest. Elena. Before either of them could say more, a sharp, urgent howl split the evening quiet, followed immediately by shouts of alarm, echoing from the eastern edge of the valley. Cale's expression hardened instantly, the tender warmth of the moment replaced by the sharp alertness of a king sensing danger. Stay close to me, he said firmly, already moving toward the source of the commotion, Elena hurrying to keep pace beside him. As they rushed through the darkening valley, Elena's heart pounded with a mixture of fear and dawning understanding that whatever fragile peace they had enjoyed over the past 2 weeks was about to be tested in ways neither of them could yet fully predict. The commotion led them to the eastern watchtower, where Fenwick stood over an unconscious guard, his expression grim, as Cale and Elena arrived breathless from their run through the valley. What happened? Cale demanded. Someone attempted to disable the eastern warning wards, Fenwick reported, gesturing toward strange, faintly glowing symbols carved into the stone archway above them, several of which now flickered weakly, instead of glowing steadily as they should. Garrick here caught them in the act, and was struck down, before he could raise a proper alarm. Fortunately, his howl carried far enough for others to hear before he lost consciousness. Cale knelt beside the injured guard, checking his pulse with obvious relief, before straightening again, his expression darkening with fury. The wards protect this entire valley from outside detection and attack. If they had been fully disabled, Draven's forces could have entered without warning, Fenwick finished grimly. Elena felt a cold chill spread through her chest. Did anyone see who did this? Fenwick hesitated, glancing briefly at Cale before answering. Garrick is regaining consciousness now. He may be able to tell us more once he recovers fully. They waited anxiously as the healers arrived to tend to the injured guard, and within the hour, Garrick had recovered enough to speak, though his voice remained weak and strained. It was dark, Garrick said slowly, struggling to recall the details. I only caught a glimpse before I was struck, but the person was smaller than most warriors, moved quickly, clearly familiar with the layout of the tower. I believe it may have been someone from within the pack itself, my king. An outsider would not have known these passages so well. Cale's expression turned to stone at this revelation. A traitor within Highmore, he said quietly, the words heavy with barely contained anger. Elena's mind immediately jumped to Corwin, to the calculating stares she had noticed over the past 2 weeks, though she hesitated to voice the accusation without solid proof. Cale, watching her expression carefully, seemed to follow the same train of thought. I will have Corwin questioned discreetly, Cale said quietly to Fenwick, once Garrick had been moved to rest properly in the healing halls. Elena's instincts about him have troubled me, since she first mentioned her concerns. I want to know exactly where he was tonight, and I want it confirmed quietly, without alerting Odessa, or anyone else, until we have clearer answers. Fenwick nodded and departed swiftly to carry out the king's orders, leaving Cale and Elena standing alone near the damaged watchtower, the flickering wards casting strange shadows across the stone walls around them. If it is Corwin, Elena said quietly, what happens to Odessa? She's raised him like a son. This would destroy her. If Corwin has betrayed this pack, Odessa will be devastated, Chaol admitted heavily. But her loyalty to Highmore has never been in question, regardless of her nephew's choices. She would want the truth uncovered, whatever pain that truth might bring her. They didn't have to wait long for answers. Within hours, Fenwick returned with 2 guards escorting a pale, visibly nervous Corwin between them, Odessa following closely behind, her expression a mixture of confusion and mounting dread. "What is the meaning of this?" Odessa demanded, though her sharp eyes had already begun calculating the grim possibilities, as she looked between the guards, her nephew, and the king's hardened expression. "Corwin," Chaol said, his voice deceptively calm despite the fury simmering beneath it. "Where were you 2 hours ago, during the attack on the eastern watchtower?" Corwin's eyes darted nervously between Chaol and his aunt. I was in my chambers, resting." "Can anyone confirm this?" Fenwick asked sharply. Corwin hesitated a fraction too long before answering, and that hesitation alone seemed to confirm every suspicion already forming in the room. "No," he admitted finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "No one can confirm it." Odessa's face drained of color as understanding dawned. "Corwin, tell me this is not what it appears to be," she said, her voice trembling with barely restrained emotion. Corwin's shoulders slumped, the last of his composure crumbling entirely under the weight of his aunt's devastated gaze. "I did not want to hurt anyone," he said quickly, desperately. "Draven's people approached me weeks ago. They promised power, position, influence beyond anything I could ever achieve, simply as your nephew, Aunt Odessa. I only meant to weaken the wards slightly, enough to prove my usefulness to them, not enough to allow a full attack." "You nearly killed Garrick," Chaol said coldly. "And you nearly opened this entire valley to Draven's forces, endangering every single life within these walls, including your own aunt's." Corwin flinched at the accusation, tears beginning to fill his eyes, as the full weight of his betrayal settled over him. "I know," he whispered. "I know, and I am sorry. I let my ambition blind me to the danger I was creating." Odessa stepped forward, her expression a devastating mixture of heartbreak and fury. "You will face the council's judgment for this betrayal," she said, her voice shaking but resolute. "And you will not use my name, or my love for you, to escape the consequences you have earned." Chaol watched the painful scene unfold, with grim satisfaction, that the traitor had been uncovered before real disaster struck, though the cost to Odessa's family clearly weighed heavily on him. He ordered Corwin taken into custody to await formal judgment before the full council, and as the guards led the weeping young man away, Odessa remained standing alone, her proud shoulders finally sagging under the weight of her grief and betrayal. Elena approached her carefully, uncertain if her presence would be welcome. "I'm so sorry, Odessa," she said softly. Odessa looked at her, surprising Elena with the sincerity in her sharp gray eyes. "You were right to be suspicious of him," she said quietly. "I dismissed your concerns as unfamiliarity with our customs. I was wrong to do so. Your instincts uncovered a danger that could have destroyed this entire kingdom. Elena Whitfield, I owe you an apology, and my gratitude, in equal measure." "You don't owe me anything," Elena said gently. "I just wanted to help keep everyone here safe." Odessa studied her for a long moment, something in her expression shifting permanently in that quiet exchange. "You have," she said finally, "more than you may ever fully understand." Later that night, as the valley finally settled into uneasy quiet, following the day's dramatic revelations, Chaol found Elena once more on the balcony, overlooking Highmore, the same place where they had first begun to acknowledge the growing connection between them weeks earlier. "You saved this kingdom today," Chaol said softly, coming to stand beside her. "Your instincts, your courage to speak up despite your own uncertainty, prevented a disaster that could have cost countless lives." "I just told you what I noticed," Elena said. "You're the one who took it seriously enough to investigate." "We saved this kingdom together," Chaol corrected gently, reaching for her hand, "as we seemed destined to do, again and again, since the very night you pulled Mira from that river." Elena smiled softly, lacing her fingers through his, the warmth of his hand steady and reassuring against her own. Despite the danger and betrayal that had marked the day, she felt, standing beside him now, a growing certainty that whatever challenges still lay ahead, she no longer wanted to face them anywhere else, but here. beside this king, who had so completely transformed her understanding of courage, loyalty, and love. In the days that followed Corwin's exposure, a strange calm settled over Highmore. Though everyone understood, it was the calm before a storm, rather than the promise of lasting peace. The council formally stripped Corwin of any future position within the pack, and exiled him beyond the Northern Territory's borders. A punishment Chaol explained was merciful, compared to the harsher judgments some advisors had demanded. Odessa, though visibly grieving the loss of the nephew she had raised, threw herself into strengthening the valley's defenses with renewed determination, working tirelessly alongside Fenwick to repair and reinforce the damaged wards. Elena found herself drawn increasingly into these preparations, offering whatever help she could, whether tending to injured guards, assisting with supply organization, or simply providing steady companionship to Mira during the anxious days of uncertainty. Her bond with Chaol continued to deepen as well, quiet moments stolen between his duties as king, gentle conversations in his mother's garden, comfortable silences shared on the balcony overlooking the valley they both now fought to protect. It was during one such quiet evening, nearly a week after Corwin's exile, that Chaol finally spoke the words that had been building steadily between them since that interrupted moment in the garden. "Elena," he said softly, taking both her hands in his, as they stood together, beneath the shimmering flowers of his mother's garden. "I need to tell you something important, something about the nature of the bond between wolves and their true mates." Elena's heart quickened at the seriousness in his voice. "What is it?" "Among my people, mate bonds are typically formed between two wolves, souls recognizing each other across lifetimes," Chaol explained carefully. "It is exceedingly rare, almost unheard of, for such a bond to form between a wolf and a human. But in the weeks since you arrived in Highmore, I have felt something growing within me that I cannot explain any other way. A pull toward you that goes beyond simple gratitude or attraction. I believe, Elena, that you may be my true mate, in every sense that matters." Elena stared at him, stunned by the weight of his words. "Chaol, I don't fully understand what that means, but I know that what I feel for you is real, deeper than anything I've ever experienced before." "A mate bond, once fully accepted, is permanent," Chaol continued, his voice trembling slightly with the vulnerability of the moment. "It would tie your life to mine in ways that cannot be undone. You would become part of this world completely, Elena, not simply as a guest under my protection, but as my equal, my partner, ruling this kingdom alongside me for as long as we both shall live." Elena felt the enormity of his words settle over her, the weight of everything she would be choosing, the life she would be leaving behind entirely, the danger and responsibility she would be accepting in its place. And yet, standing here beneath the shimmering flowers, looking into the ice-blue eyes of the man who had shown her more courage, tenderness, and honor than she had ever known existed, Elena felt no hesitation at all. "I choose this," she said softly, her voice steady with certainty. "I choose you, Chaol, not out of obligation, not out of gratitude, but because somewhere along this incredible, terrifying journey, I fell completely in love with you." Chaol's eyes filled with emotion so profound it nearly stole Elena's breath, and he pulled her gently into his arms, holding her close, as though she were the most precious thing in his entire world. "I love you as well, Elena Whitfield," he murmured against her hair. "More deeply than I ever believed myself capable of loving anyone." They stood together in the garden for a long while, wrapped in the quiet joy of their shared confession, the danger of Draven, and the uncertainty of the future momentarily forgotten in the warmth of finally acknowledging what had been growing between them since that stormy night by the river weeks ago. News of the impending mate bond spread quickly through Highmore, and though a few traditionalists among the older pack members expressed initial hesitation at the unprecedented union between their king and a human woman, the overwhelming response from the pack was one of celebration and hope. Elena's courage and kindness had already earned her genuine respect throughout the valley, and many saw the forming bond as a powerful symbol of unity and strength during uncertain times. Preparations began almost immediately for a bonding ceremony, one that would blend ancient wolf traditions with elements Elena could bring from her own human heritage, a celebration designed to honor both worlds coming together as one. Mira threw herself into the preparations with joyful enthusiasm, insisting on personally overseeing many of the details as a way of repaying, in some small measure, the debt she felt she and her children owed to Elena's courage and kindness. "I am so happy for you," Mira told Elena one afternoon, as they sat together in the garden, watching Kale and Ren toddling unsteadily nearby with her twin brother, Finn, close behind. "Truly, Elena, I do not think I could imagine a more fitting queen for this kingdom, or a more fitting mate for Kale." "Thank you," Elena said, smiling as she watched the twins play. "I never imagined my life would look anything like this, but I wouldn't trade it for anything now." Even as joy and celebration filled the days leading up to the bonding ceremony, the shadow of Draven's continued threat lingered at the edges of everyone's awareness. Reports from scouts along the border indicated increasing activity within Draven's territory, whispers of gathering forces and mounting aggression that suggested the uneasy peace of recent weeks would not last much longer. Kale remained vigilant, even amid the happiness of his approaching bond ceremony, determined to ensure that whatever conflict lay ahead, Highmore would be fully prepared to defend the family and the kingdom he had grown to love so deeply. The day of the bonding ceremony arrived beneath a sky so clear and blue that many in Highmore called it a blessing from the ancient spirits their people had honored for generations. The entire valley had transformed overnight, flowers woven through every archway, banners bearing the crest of the Northern Pack hanging from every rooftop, and the air itself seemed to hum with quiet anticipation as pack members gathered from every corner of the territory to witness the historic union of their king and his human mate. Elena stood in her chambers that morning, staring at her reflection in wonder, as Talia and Mira helped her prepare for the ceremony. Her dress, crafted by the valley's finest artisans, blended traditional Wolfpack designs with elements Elena had described from her own human heritage: silver thread, woven through pale fabric that shimmered faintly, echoing the enchanted flowers of Kale's mother's garden. "You look beautiful," Mira said softly, her eyes bright with happy tears as she adjusted the delicate circlet resting atop Elena's hair. Kale is going to be speechless. "I'm nervous," Elena admitted, her hands trembling slightly as she smoothed the front of her dress. "This is such a huge step. I keep thinking about how different my life was just a few weeks ago." "Nervousness is natural," Talia said gently, "but every person in this valley, wolf and human alike, has come to love and respect you, Elena. Today is not just about your bond with Kale. It is a celebration of everything you have already done for this kingdom." Elena took a deep breath, steadying herself with their kind words, and allowed herself a moment to simply feel grateful for the incredible, unexpected turn her life had taken. When the time finally came, she was escorted through the valley toward the ceremonial grounds, a natural amphitheater, carved into the mountainside where generations of pack leaders had been joined with their mates throughout Highmore's long history. Kale waited for her at the center of the grounds, dressed in formal attire that emphasized his powerful, commanding presence, his ice-blue eyes fixed on Elena with an intensity that stole her breath the moment their gazes met. As she walked toward him, surrounded by hundreds of pack members watching with hopeful, joyful expressions, Elena felt every trace of her earlier nervousness melt away, replaced by an overwhelming certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be. Odessa, now fully restored to her position as Kale's most trusted advisor, presided over the ceremony with quiet dignity, her earlier suspicion of Elena long since transformed into genuine respect and affection. "We gather today," Odessa began, her voice carrying clearly across the amphitheater, "to witness a union unlike any this kingdom has seen in generations. A union between wolf and human, forged not through ancient bloodlines, but through courage, sacrifice, and love, freely given without expectation of reward." Elena and Kale faced each other as Odessa continued the traditional ceremony, exchanging vows that blended ancient pack customs with words Elena had chosen from her own heart, promises of loyalty, partnership, and unwavering love that would guide them both through whatever challenges still lay ahead. "Elena Whitfield," Kale said, his deep voice trembling slightly with emotion as he took her hands in his. "From the night you pulled Mira from the raging river, you have shown this kingdom what true courage and selflessness look like. I promise to honor you, protect you, and love you for every day of the life we now build together, as equals, as partners, and as mates bound by choice and love, rather than simple fate." "Kale," Elena replied, her own voice steady despite the tears gathering in her eyes, "you showed me a world I never imagined existed, and welcomed me into it with a kindness and respect I will treasure forever. I promise to stand beside you, to support this kingdom and its people with everything I have, and to love you completely, for as long as we both shall live." As they completed the final words of the ancient bonding ritual, a warm, golden light seemed to pulse gently between their joined hands, visible to everyone gathered in the amphitheater, a sign, the older wolves whispered in awe, of a true and powerful mate bond being sealed. Kale pulled Elena into his arms, and as their lips met in a tender, joyful kiss, the entire valley erupted into cheers and celebration, howls of joy rising from wolves throughout Highmoor, in a chorus that echoed off the surrounding mountains. Mira, holding both Ren and Finn close, as she watched the celebration with tears of happiness streaming down her face, turned to Talia beside her. "She saved us all that night by the river," Mira said softly, "and now she has become the queen this kingdom needed all along." The celebration continued long into the evening, feasting and dancing filling the valley with joy and laughter that seemed to banish, at least for one night, any lingering shadow of the danger still gathering beyond their borders. Elena danced in Kale's arms beneath the stars, surrounded by the family and community she had never expected to find, feeling more complete and certain of her place in the world than she had ever felt in her entire life. Later that night, as the celebrations finally quieted and the valley settled into peaceful rest, Elena and Kale stood together once more on the balcony overlooking Highmoor, now bathed in soft moonlight and the gentle glow of lanterns still flickering throughout the valley below. "Whatever comes next," Kale said softly, wrapping his arms around Elena as she leaned back against his chest. "Draven's ambitions, the challenges of ruling this kingdom together, anything the future holds, I know now that we will face it as true partners, bound by a love stronger than any threat that could ever come against us." Elena smiled, turning in his arms to look up into his eyes, filled with a certainty and peace she had never known before this journey began. "I pulled a wolf from a river 3 weeks ago," she said softly, "and somehow, that single act of courage led me to becoming queen of an entire kingdom, standing beside a man I love more than I ever thought possible." "Fate has a strange way of finding those who deserve it most," Kale murmured, pressing a gentle kiss against her forehead. Below them, the valley of Highmoor glowed peacefully beneath the stars, home now not just to a king and his people, but to a queen, whose courage and kindness had already begun writing a new chapter in the long, proud history of the Northern Pack. Whatever battles still waited beyond the mountains, Elena knew, standing there in Kale's arms, that she would face them with the same fearless heart that had once carried her into a raging river, to save a life that was never truly a stranger's at all, but rather the very beginning of her destiny.